to do not only with the entire philosophy of our ministry here at Bible Baptist, but also a recommended change that we are proposing in leadership style in our pastoral offices.
Hopefully you brought your book back with you. I know that may be a lot to ask. If you need to pick one up on your way out, please do that. But please bring that with you again next week at least. And we're going to do our best to fill in the blanks for you as we move through that. But we started 3 weeks ago by exploring God's vision for his church. And we looked specifically at Acts chapter 2 and Ephesians chapter 4. But the main idea we wanted you to walk away with was this concept that the church is not a bunker to defend, it's a battalion to deploy. This idea that it's not a place where we come and just sit safely and hope that the world never comes and knocks on our door. Rather, we are equipped to go. As Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And we used the quote by Charles Spurgeon that I think is really helpful with this whole concept of the church being a battalion that is deployed. When Spurgeon writes, if sinners be damned, at least let them leap to hell over our dead bodies. And if they perish, let them perish with our arms wrapped tightly around their knees, imploring them, begging them to stay. And if hell must be filled, let it be filled in the teeth of our exertions, and let no one go unwarned and unprayed for. And that's our great desire, that we become a church that isn't just a bunker where we protect ourselves from everything, but a battalion that's deployed where we go and we pray for actively and we warn actively those who desperately need the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And many experts suggest that the easy days of the church in the United States of America are fast fleeting away. And yet you don't have to study history much to understand that the greatest times of revival and growth in the history of the church often come under the times of most intense persecution. And we need to be ready, and we need to welcome that, and we need to look and anticipate that as a great opportunity to proclaim the good news of the gospel. Secondly, in the second week, we looked at becoming a dandelion church. And specifically, we looked at 4 characteristics of a dandelion. A dandelion is these clustered yellow flowers that are easy to identify. And we correlated that to the understanding that true worshipers of Jesus Christ should stand in direct contrast to the culture in which they live. The be in the world but not of the world concept. That as dandelions we should be easy to spot, not for all the things we hate and stand against, but for the direct contrast in how we live our lives each and every day, not just the political causes we take up. We should be easy to pick out. Secondly, a dandelion is known for its deep and abiding roots. And this idea of being disciples who grow as obedient learners, rooted in the Word of God, not just head knowledge, but knowledge that translates into application for how we live our lives. Impossible to be a true worshiper without also being an obedient learner. The Word of God serves as the foundation of our understanding of who He is and who Jesus Christ is and what He's done for us. The third characteristic of a dandelion church is those green, lush, healthy leaves. This idea of giving as humble servants to the church. And we're going to talk today about leading and serving in teams and the benefits that we have of pooling our resources and our giftedness to accomplish a shared mission. If we think about the responsibility, the commission in Matthew 28 to go and make disciples of all nations, that's a big task. Individually, we cannot hope to accomplish it. But collectively, as both the local church and the universal church of God, we can come together and see God do great things in His world for His glory. This idea of being brothers and sisters that serve regularly together, that know each other personally, and that are loyal to one another and unified in their pursuit of a vision. And finally, of course, the great characteristic of the dandelion is its ability to reproduce itself. to travel, to be outfitted and equipped with the great parachute and the wind, waiting for the wind to carry it far away and to reproduce itself in some other location. And we want to be men and women, boys and girls, who are not just growing as disciples for our own sake, but who are going and making disciples. You see, that is our mission, not our mission. It is our collective mission to go and make disciples of all nations. That's the kind of church we want to become as we talk about being a dandelion church, one that is easily identified as a gathered community of true worshipers, one that is easily identified by its deep roots of growing, obedient disciples, one that is obviously serving with great joy with one another as humble servants, and a church that's active in its pursuit, as the Spurgeon quote reminds us, active in its pursuit of those who have not yet heard or not yet embraced the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So week one, we wanted you to understand that the church is not a bunker to defend, it's a battalion to deploy. Week two, we wanted you to walk away with the understanding that as a dandelion church, we need to be growing like weeds as fast as we possibly can. But we also need to be going like dandelions, waiting for the wind, for the movement of the Spirit in our lives and opportunities for us to share the gospel with others. So we want you to remember those two concepts as we kind of build on that now, as we look at what we mean when we say leading and serving in teams. And I'll invite you to turn in your booklet to the page that has the leading and serving in teams blanks for you to fill in. We're going to apologize in advance. We put together this booklet 4 or 5 weeks ago, and not that what's in here isn't what we're going to talk about, but we've been chewing on it and dialoguing about it some more and expanded it a little bit. So I'm going to give you the blanks, and oh, the screen is working. It's not working here, it's working there. Good. I'm going to give you the blanks on this page so that you can just all relax and rest easy and not worry about them. And then we're going to talk specifically about some of these categories with a little greater understanding than maybe we thought we would when we put it onto paper a couple of weeks ago. But as we think about this idea of leading and serving in teams, we want this to be a top-down model that we as a church embrace and live together. And we believe that this is a biblical model. The biblical model for leading and serving is always done in teams. It's always done in community. And we're going to explain that a little bit throughout the morning, but the first we see is in Proverbs, the wisdom principle of leading and serving in teams. Proverbs 11:14 says, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in the abundance of counselors, there's safety. And there's numerous wisdom principles throughout the Proverbs that speak of this wisdom principle of doing life together. I even think, even though it's a marriage principle, we look way back at the beginning in Genesis chapter 2, and God looks down at Adam before sin has even entered the world. And he looks at Adam and announces that it's not good for man to be alone. Now, I know that's specifically in reference to his partnership and compatibility with a wife, but I think the principle is still the same. It's always dangerous. God did not create us to live in isolation. He created us to live in relationship both with each other and, most importantly, in a relationship with him through Jesus Christ. So there's great wisdom, and we're going to unpack that a little more. Moses, your first blank. Moses gives us the biblical model of leading and serving in teams, and Pastor Ron's going to unpack that in a few moments. Jesus modeled this as he chose the 12 disciples and equipped them and sent them out 2 by 2 into the towns and the cities when he sent them out to proclaim the good news of the gospel. So Jesus lived this and modeled this and expected this idea of leading and serving in teams. Paul and Barnabas, Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Paul repeated this model over and over and over as he brought young men along in their knowledge of the scriptures and their ability to preach and proclaim the gospel. This idea of serving and leading in teams, and even the older-younger concept that's so helpful and valuable both ways. Both older to younger and younger to older. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then throughout the book of Romans, Paul talks about fellow workers. This shared partnership in ministry. So there's a biblical precedent for this vision and concept of leading and serving in teams. There's also a practical function. There's a practical function for this. First, teamwork, and we'll talk about this, motivates participation. When you have someone else who is sharing the burden with you, it's much easier to commit to getting involved than if you're the only one who's expected to keep something going. And I could tell you many stories in my 10 years here of godly, faithful people who have been left to die as the leaders of ministries with no help and no support. And though they want to do their best, burnout is inevitable. It's not good for us to do ministry by ourselves, whether in pastoral leadership, all the way down to what we might define as the most menial, insignificant service opportunity in the church. There's value. It motivates your willingness to participate when you know you're going to have someone sharing the load. Secondly, it multiplies productivity, shared giftedness, different perspectives, different understandings, different awareness. When we have teams of people leading and serving together, it makes us far more aware of the greater need that we're trying to reach, as opposed to one person from a very localized demographic or perspective or stage of life or whatever it may be. Teamwork multiplies productivity. And you see this in the sports world, you see this in the workforce. When we work together, production goes up. And lastly, teamwork shares the responsibility. If it goes south, if something happens or there needs to be something that needs to be troubleshot, you can share that responsibility as opposed to one person being left holding the bag and being left held responsible for everything that may or may not have been their responsibility to begin with. So these are some of the reasons that we think leading and serving in teams is going to be so valuable and so necessary for us to accomplish our mission and our vision as we move forward as a church. So let's look at what we mean when we talk about leading and serving in teams. And let's first look at the biblical model of leading and serving in teams. And the first understanding that teamwork adds wisdom. And I invite you to turn to Proverbs chapter 15 with me. And there's numerous proverbs that deal with this wisdom principle, but teamwork adds wisdom. Teamwork provides added insight and perspective and helps us avoid our blind spots. That's why Proverbs 11, which we already looked at, reminds us that in the abundance of counselors, there is safety. There is security. And we've experienced this as we've served together both as pastors and as elders and with our deacons. There's great wealth and stability that comes with knowing more than one person is speaking into a process or more than one person is taking responsibility for it. But Proverbs 15, verse 22 says, "Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed." Again, this concept of teamwork and multiple people speaking into a process. And then if you flip over to Proverbs 24, verse 6, we see this wisdom principle. And actually begin in verse 5. Proverbs 24, verse 5. "A wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in the abundance of counselors there is victory." So we see just a few snapshots for us of understanding how valuable the concept of leading and serving in teams is. And why we believe this is not only essential for us, but this is a true biblical model of how leadership and service should be done. And we want to unpack this a little more as we go a little deeper into looking at some narrative examples of men in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament who modeled this wisdom principle of leading and serving in teams.
Another Proverbs for you is Proverbs 18, verse 1. "Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." Again, this principle of teamwork, listening, serving together. Take your Bible now, if you will, and turn back to the book of Exodus, chapter 18. As we look at this second principle, teamwork shares responsibility. It brings blessings by sharing the load. Teamwork shares responsibility. It brings blessing by sharing the load. This is the principle, the wisdom principle. Teamwork Teams help us from being overwhelmed. Leaders who lead alone are easy victims for Satan's strategy of having them think it's all about me. Teamwork is an antidote against this spirit of isolationism, which says, this is mine. You don't touch it. We need to understand, of course, when somebody says to you, well, what's your church? Whenever anybody asks me that, what's your church? My immediate response to that is, I don't have one. It belongs to Christ. Now, I don't usually say that because I don't want to sound like super spiritual, but that's the reality of it. This is not mine, it's not yours. We are owned by Christ, and what we do as a body. That whole principle of 1 Corinthians, the head without the body is dead. It's all connected here. And so whatever part of the body I am related to Christ. It's Christ who gives me life. And we serve together. So Moses had to learn this principle. And he had to learn the principle of the importance of serving in a team by not serving as a team. He had to learn the lesson the hard way. You know, there's two ways to learn life's lessons. Listen to good advice or make stupid decisions. It's always better to do the first. Don't make stupid decisions. Listen to godly advice. And so Moses was a loner. Now, we understand why he was a loner. How many of you here would say you're a loner by nature? Okay? I understand. I am too. That's just kind of the way we're wired. And there's many things that go into that. It went into that in Moses' life. Think about why he would have been a loner. What happened to him? At age 4 or 5, he was separated from his family, probably didn't see them again, went to the Pharaoh's palace, was raised in a completely different context, right? All the time knowing this is not who I am, I don't belong here, I don't fit here. And then when he finally gets around to trying to deliver Israel from its captivity, what happens? The people reject him, right? So then what does he do? He runs away from the whole thing and he goes to the backside of the Midian desert. And then what? Well, while he's there for the next 40 years, he's separated from his family, separated from Egypt, and so he becomes a shepherd of his father-in-law's flock in the desert. You don't get much more isolated than that. Try practicing that for 40 years. Well, this is what made him a loner. And we're not finding fault. He didn't make all these choices. He didn't choose to be isolated from his family. He didn't choose to be driven out of Egypt. He didn't choose any of these things. He reacted to these things. And then God calls him to connectedness. Well, leaders are often loners. And their strength as a leader is that they are loners, but it's also their weakness. A loner says, I don't need anybody. That's a strength in one setting, but it's also a great weakness. And we're going to see that revealed in Moses' life very quickly. Broken family relationships, misfit in Egypt, rejected by the Jews, loner shepherd. Now he calls to deliver Israel. We're going to fast forward really fast, all through the plagues, across the Red Sea, down to Mount Sinai, coming out of Mount Sinai, or just before Mount Sinai. We're in Exodus chapter 18. And in Exodus 18, Jethro, the father-in-law, shows up on the scene, and he sees what's going on with Moses. Chapter 18, verse 13. The next day, Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you? He said, well, I'm the one that knows the will of God. So they come to me whenever they have an argument, and I explain to them God's will, and I make the call on it. How many were there? 2 million. 2 million people. How many conflicts do you think there would be among 2 million people? That's why he said from morning till evening, they just stood in line and stood in line and stood in line. And Jethro, now he's the outsider. You know, he's not the guy that got the revelation. He's not the guy that got the burning bush experience. He's just a common sense shepherd. And he looks at this thing and says, you're going to kill yourself and them too. You can't do this. Listen to me. You need a team. You need leaders over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s, over 10s. And you teach them, and they can handle the minor things. And if something is really major, they can bring it to you. And Moses goes, that's a really good idea. So he does it. But I want you to understand that though he does this, it still doesn't affect his style of leadership. He's still a loner. He's still calling the shots. So now we fast forward to Numbers chapter 11, quickly, Numbers 11, and we discover in verse 11, it might help if I'm in Numbers instead of Leviticus. I thought it looked odd. Here we are. Numbers 11 and verse 11, all the people back there in verse 10 are complaining once again, and it's finally gotten to Moses. If you're a loner leader, it will eventually catch up with you. It did. And finally, Moses said, I can't handle this. Look at what he says in verse 11. Numbers 11:11. Moses said to the Lord, why have you dealt ill with your servant? Why are you punishing me? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once, if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness. Moses, why is this all about you? But do you see what the tendency is of the loner leader? To take it all on themselves. And what stands out? God is unfair and I'm a failure. God is unfair to make me do this alone, and I'm a failure. Then what does God say? Look at verse 16. I want you to circle the first word. Then. And not until then. Then the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that's on you and put it on them, and they will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone. You see, if this had happened, I believe, if this had happened before Moses was at this point, he would have said, why are you taking this away from me? Why are you tearing this out of my hands? Why won't you let me? I've done this all these years. Why now are you taking this away from me? But you see, when he was brought to the realization that it was time, way past time, he didn't feel like they were taking anything away from him. He felt like finally someone can share the load. Teamwork. It's always been God's plan, but we all have to be ready for it.
So we see how teamwork adds wisdom. And then we've looked at how teamwork shares responsibility. Thirdly, we want to understand that teamwork motivates participation. And I invite you to go with me to the book of Mark in the New Testament, chapter 3. You see, teamwork motivates participation by providing encouragement and facilitating opportunities to serve. If I'm invited to be a part of something that's more than just me having to carry it out, that makes the yes a lot easier, knowing that I'm going to be equipped and outfitted and trained and given opportunity to grow long before I'm going to be sent out. And we see this principle modeled in the life of Jesus and his relationship with the 12 disciples. In Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 13, we read, Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him. Circle that. So that they might be with him. There was a period of time that he was inviting these apostles, these disciples, to be with him, to learn from him, to be trained by him, to understand the mission that he was calling them to. And then he also says his purpose, and he might send them out to preach. So don't miss verse 14. He appointed 12 so that they might be with him first. And he might send them out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. And he appointed the 12, and then Mark goes on to list the names of the 12 that Jesus chooses. And later on in chapter 6, we see this as well in Mark chapter 6, verse 7, where it talks about Jesus calling the 12 and beginning to send them out 2 by 2. So even once they've been with him, over a period of time, learning and growing and him teaching them and them experiencing the miracles that he would perform and the opportunities that they would have and the persecution that they would face and watching how he responded to that as a leader and as their teacher, then he sends them out. But he does it 2 by 2. Even when he sends them out, it's not a, now you're ready. You see, it's not about arriving to a point where you somehow are able to lead and serve and be in charge all by yourself. That's what we see in the life of Moses, and we see that guarded against even in the model that Jesus uses with his disciples. Don't miss it. He invited them to be with him so that he might send them out, and later Mark helps us understand that he's sending them out 2 by 2. You see, the wisdom principle here is it provides encouragement. It provides strength. The period of time that you're with someone older, wiser, teaching you to learn, that invites participation. I'm sure when Jesus extended that invitation to them, the ones that accepted that largely was due to the fact that they got to spend time with Jesus. That's why I happen to think that one of the greatest recruitment tools is not me or Pastor Ron standing up here saying, we have a need in children's ministry, anybody want to serve? We have a need on the usher team, anybody want to serve? We have this need, we have that need, and it's kind of this very sterile invitation to come and be a part of something that you have no idea about. The greater recruitment is, come do it with me. Come be a part of what I'm doing. Come be a part of what I'm excited to be a part of. Come and see what's happening in my ministry. Come and see what God's doing in the areas that I have opportunity to influence believers and unbelievers. That's the greater recruitment. And notice that Jesus wasn't recruiting them to do something that he himself wasn't willing to do. It's not, oh, you come do that, but I don't do that. That's apostles' work. That's disciples' work. I'm going to sit over here and just observe. No, Jesus wasn't recruiting them to something beneath him. But he also wasn't recruiting them just to serve with him forever and always. There was also a point where he was going to equip them and feel like they were ready to be sent out. And what did the disciples eventually do? Many of them went and after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, many of them had disciples of their own that they were working with. And we even see apostleship in Paul, as we're going to look at in a few minutes, where he himself also invited others. And that was very common in the culture of that day, to invite people to be a part of what you're doing. Let them live it with you. Let them experience it with you. Let them see you up close. And unfortunately, in our Western civilization and even in our evangelical church communities, there's this kind of popish idea that there's the man, and we'll all sit and observe and applaud and be grateful that we have the man. But then when the man leaves, we all go, now what? Because there was no shared partnership. There was no shared expectation of leading and serving as teams and bringing along the next generation of leaders, raising them up, not just in the important leadership positions, but across all areas of ministry, where all of our giftedness can be complementing one another and where we can find opportunities to use our passions without being the one who has to make sure everything happens all the time. Wouldn't you be more apt to serve if you didn't have to do it every week, every time? If there was a team of people that served together? You see, Teamwork motivates that willingness to participate. And we see that in Jesus. Come so that you may be with me, you may observe me, you may learn from me, and then you're going to go. And I'm going to send you to do what I've been doing with you. There's going to be no confusion. And that's what we mean when we say teamwork motivates participation.
Thirdly, teamwork multiplies productivity.
Did you lose your mic?
I think it was
There you
them, not me.
Got it.
See how I shifted the blame?
Yeah.
See how I did that?
Teamwork.
Yes. Thanks, team. Now they'll shut me off. Teamwork multiplies productivity by enabling the investing of each one's best gifts. You see, when you're responsible for doing something all alone, all by yourself, you have to do whatever it is, whether that's your strength or your weakness, makes no difference. If you're serving alone, you have to do it all. But when you serve on a team, it enables each one to use their best gifts more often, because each individual has those areas of strength that are different from one another. Again, the whole body imagery. And so teamwork multiplies productivity. The wisdom principle is teams increase output by enabling others to use their best gifts. We see this, of course, in Paul and Barnabas. In Acts chapter 11, verse 25, Acts 11, verse 25, we see Barnabas up there in Antioch in this new church plant, the first church that we know of that was started without any apostolic influence. It started just as an outgrowth of disciples making disciples. And when the apostles heard about it, they sent Barnabas up to check the whole thing out and to see if it was legit. And he went there and just rejoiced at what God was doing. This is the Great Commission. It doesn't take an apostle to start a church. Ordinary disciples can make ordinary disciples to accomplish the extraordinary task of the Great Commission. Amen. And so Barnabas goes up to check it out. And when he does, he sees a significant gathering of Gentile believers, as well as Jews, but he's realizing that, you know, if Paul was here, Paul has such a gift in this area. He could strengthen this work tremendously. Instead of saying, this is mine, this is my territory, Paul, you want to plant a church, you plant it over there in Tarsus, leave me alone, this is my Jerusalem right here now, this is my, no, that's not Barnabas' heart. Never has been. Everything we see about Barnabas in the book of Acts, we see a man who draws others in to engage them in growth and service. And so he goes over to Tarsus to find the Apostle Paul. Now, it's fascinating to me, and we don't have time to get into this, but the Apostle Paul has been over there for close to 10 years, all by himself, in Tarsus, making tents, carrying on, growing up spiritually. Barnabas goes over, grabs him, brings him over to Antioch, and the two of them, it says, he went to Tarsus, verse 25, Acts 11, to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch, and for a whole year, notice, they met with the church, they, plural, and taught, they taught a great many people, and in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. So we see this principle of Barnabas going to get Saul and the two of them together. And of course, we know as we move to Acts chapter 13, the Holy Spirit calls them to take the gospel further into Gentile territory. And you remember what the Holy Spirit said in Acts 13, set apart Paul and Barnabas to the work for which I have called them. Again, it was a team call. It was a team ministry in Antioch, and it was a team call to take the gospel into Gentile territory. So we see this whole idea of teamwork. When they had a conflict in the team, and they did, unfortunately, in Acts chapter 15, and Paul and Barnabas separated. We don't have time to explain all that. It's a fascinating story. That was all ultimately reconciled. But they separated, and Barnabas took another guy, his nephew, John Mark, that was the subject of the controversy, took him. And then Paul took Silas, and they headed north up towards Galatia. And then when they got over to Lystra, they picked up Timothy and brought him into the work. And he became an integral part of this growing team ministry. And as we follow the Apostle Paul through the book of Acts and then through the epistles, we discover this principle of Paul always bringing along others in the team. And it was a team ministry. It truly was. The apostles' ministry was a team ministry.
So as we think about what's next for us as a church, as we cast vision for the future, this value of leading and serving in teams is very important to us. And we are already modeling this and seeing this in a number of ways in our church currently. We do this with our elder council, where we have the added wisdom that comes from multiple men, qualified men, according to 1 Timothy chapter 3, multiple qualified men that you as the congregation select to serve together, that add wisdom, that share responsibility, that motivate participation. Undoubtedly, if we voted on one guy to be the elder, that might be a hard job to fill. But when you're invited, and those of you that currently serve or have served, one of the great luxuries and one of the great draws of serving as an elder is the opportunity to spend time with those men who are wise and godly and who have different perspectives. And we welcome and value that in our elder council and have for the better part of 10 plus years here at Bible Baptist Church. So we're already doing this in a number of ways, but there's some places in our ministry where we're not doing as good a job at this as we ought to. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, about how we get there. But be encouraged that this biblical expectation, this model of leading and serving in teams is already happening in some ways. And the first way it is in our elder council, where we have 8, 9, 10 men who serve regular terms together and who provide wisdom and counsel and perspective as they give shared oversight to our church, to Bible Baptist Church. And that has been a wonderful joy. And one of the great privileges for me is I came in, and I don't know why you did this, frankly, at 23 and was made an elder. I'm not sure how that works. But one of the great privileges of my ministry career here at Bible Baptist Church has been able to sit at that table with probably close to 20 different men over the last 10 years and to learn from them. To go through high water days and low water days as a church, and to see godly men respond to crisis, godly men respond to the needs of their congregation, godly men navigate and seek the will of God for what's next. That's been a high and holy privilege for me as a young pastor to grow up in that environment of team, and to feel that accountability and that shared responsibility that has come with leading and serving in a team of men that we call the Elder Council.
Another of our serving teams, of course, is that of our deacons. And they, in their caring ministry, are continually evaluating. It's fascinating. Sometimes I wish those meetings, our elders and deacons meetings, could be videotaped. There's some confidentiality that's necessary with the things that are dealt with. But just to see how the teams function with each other is a delight and a blessing. And with the deacons, they are continually evaluating, how can we do our job better? How can we serve the body better? This last month, and I don't think I'm betraying anything, this last month they were discussing what are the key qualities of an effective deacon? And then how can we as deacons help each other in our ministries? Not just the flock that has been given to us to look after, to pray for, to intercede for, and to look after, but how can we help each other do a better job in caring for each other's flocks? And so, again, this whole team idea, it's not that this is mine and you stay away. There's no turf wars when teams are effective.
Amen. And as I mentioned, there's 9 men that serve in our elder council. There's 20 deacons that serve together and meet monthly. But we want to see this model translate to other aspects. One we're going to talk about in a minute is our pastoral team, and Pastor Ron's going to talk about that in a minute. But the other is in our ministry teams. And we've been talking a lot about our children's ministry recently. This is a great vision of mine as the pastor of Family Ministries, to see our children's ministry model be more based around teams, team sharing responsibility. Some of you have been here long enough to know that in the old days when you signed up for children's ministry, it was you in the nursery every Sunday forever and always until you died gravely ill or something else happened. And those can be great ministries to serve in, and you do it because you love it, but those can be lonely times of trying to stay energized with a ministry that you continually have to pour into. So we're looking to build that as one of our ministry teams, and in the next week we're going to talk about some other team ministry opportunities for you to be a part of. But let me just give you some statistics, okay? We're celebrating that we put 185 individuals through our children's ministry training. That's fabulous.
Amen.
And that's great. But if we look at our current needs in our ministry, we need about 216 different people to adequately staff our children's ministry so that nobody has to serve multiple places multiple times. Does that make sense? So we still have a ways to go. And I don't want to say only. We have 112 right now, people who serve faithfully in different rotations in our kids ministry. But if you want to be where some exciting things are happening in not only the future of our church, but the present of our church, come and be a part of our kids ministry. And I have jobs for those of you that don't even like kids, okay? I do. If you don't like kids and you don't want to have a lot of interaction with children, I still have jobs for you in the kids ministry, okay? It's true. It sounds weird, but it's true. And by the end, I promise you that you will love children in a greater way. But that's one way where as we do our Sunday school classes, as we do our Awana Kids Club ministry, as we do kids church, to make it so that people aren't left with being the only one who has the responsibility and the only one who participates and the only one who has to generate productivity week after week, to surround each of those ministries with teams of people that serve together. There's so much greater joy and fulfillment and energy that is brought to those ministries when we lead them and serve together in teams. So stay tuned, because as I mentioned before, the recruitment tool I'm going to be using is some of you are going to be getting phone calls from me in the next couple of weeks and saying, hey, I noticed you went through the training, but you're not serving anywhere. Guess what? I got a place for you to serve. And others of you, I may be putting you through the training so that you can serve. And in reality, all of us should be asking, where can we serve? Where can we use our gifts? Where can we join a team to be a part of what God's doing in his church for the good of his people, the furtherance of his gospel, and the glory of his name? But the thing we want to talk about the most as we kind of finish up here for the next 15 minutes is kind of a new thought for us. And it's the idea of introducing what we call a pastoral leadership team. And to relieve you from feeling like you have to write anything down, at the end of the service, you'll get a packet highlighting all of the things we're going to talk about for about the next 15 minutes. So I just want you to sit back, relax, and soak in and absorb what we're going to talk about. We'll have some open forums to dialogue about this more, but we want to introduce to you what we call the concept of a pastoral leadership team, which embraces this value of serving and leading in teams from the top down.
The model that we're talking about is that Dan and I would serve as co-lead pastors. The way it is now, I'm the lead pastor. Dan is the associate of family ministries. The transition would be as co-lead pastors, a co-lead team. We'll discuss what the responsibilities would be and how that would work out. We've got a fact sheet with questions and answers, and then you come back tonight to open it up and continue to ask your questions. But this is what we are presenting to you as our recommendation, a pastoral leadership team. The pastoral leadership team would consist of Dan and I. Together, we would be responsible for the day-to-day operations and ministries of Bible Baptist Church. Together with the elders, the pastoral leadership team would discern, communicate, and implement its God-given mission and vision for the church. Dan and I would intentionally share the pulpit and carefully work together to see that the spiritual care, nurture, and growth of the members and attendees of the church is cared for. Why the pastoral team model? Well, as we look ahead, I've said from the day I started here back in 2010 that we needed to be looking ahead to getting younger people in leadership and to preparing the church for the next generation. We need to be doing that. And it's not just now, it's always. It needs to be a continual focus. If you want to build a strong and vibrant and lasting ministry, you must focus on several things, which we'll talk about next week. But one is continually bringing younger leadership into leadership roles and mentoring that leadership so that transitions are not radical, but rather normal, because younger men and women for their ministries are trained and brought into leadership. So that's what we're looking at. As we look ahead, doing this combined leadership team enables us over the next 5 years to develop and implement this in such a way that we can model the value of teamwork, by doing it together. And the reality is we already are and have for the last 5 years. What we're looking at is changing something on paper that functionally has been taking place from the day I started here, because I have a team philosophy of ministry, always have. I was discipled in a team ministry, in a navigator's model, as a new believer on a college campus. And so the idea of team ministry has always been inculcated in my understanding of Scripture. Now, Pastor Dan has served here, as you know, for over 10 years with a growing and expanding role. And another thing I said when I came on is that we need to be looking ahead to this transition of leadership so that Dan can use all of his gifts. And so I can use all of my gifts, but we can use those in a complementary way that demonstrates to everyone that we value teamwork and we value younger leadership. It's critically important for the health and growth of the church. Now, what are the benefits? Well, as we said, diversity of gifts. Both Dan and I have unique leadership gifts and abilities that complement and balance each other. I'm a geezer, so I have experience and hopefully some wisdom. Geezerhood does not guarantee that, however. Complemented by Dan's excitement and vision for the future. Hopefully I can provide continued stability while Dan provides constant stimulation. We need that. We need both. As to teamwork, the leadership team allows us, again, to model the ministry mindset to our church. It also eliminates the time and tension of what's next. Rather than waiting for me to have to retire, for Dan to exercise his leadership gifts is a waste of his gifts and an unnecessary holding back for the future. In conversations that Dan and I have had in the past, I've said I'm willing to step aside anytime. I do not want to be and never wanted to be a hindrance to any ministry. And I've seen many ministries where friends of mine have stayed too long. They couldn't see it at the time, but after it became painfully obvious, they realized they stayed too long. They loved the ministry, they loved the people loved them, but everything was slowing down to a standstill. I want to be an encouragement and a help, not an affliction. And so as we move into this team leadership model, it enables Dan to use his gifts as well as me to use mine and use them together in such a way that it doesn't say he has to twiddle his thumbs on his visionary gifts, on his leadership gifts, on his teaching abilities until such time as I have a stroke, heart attack, or the rapture comes and then he loses the whole thing anyway. So that's really not what we're looking to do. So the whole idea is a team model of leadership that enables both of us to use our gifts. And even though I really do, I like this together thing. As a matter of fact, I was working on the next message on the Holy Spirit series when we're done with this, and I was saying, okay, Dan can do this part. No, I guess Dan won't be doing that part. We do enjoy this. We may be doing this for shorter series in the future. But again, enabling each of us to use our varied gifts, not just in the pulpit, but everywhere. The team leadership model allows for that.
So how will this team work together with the elders? That may be a question you have. And the reality is that not much changes. Both Ron and I currently serve as elders on the Elder Council anyway. And at the end of the day, the elders really are responsible with the oversight of the church, not the pastors. We are accountable to them. At the end of the day, we are accountable to the elders for all that we do. But as we interact with the elders, it'll be very similar to how we do now, where we bring kind of 3 different levels of information and decision making to them. We'll inform them of things that they need to be aware of, but have given us freedom to make decisions about and to do in our day-to-day responsibilities. We'll bring things to them where we need their input and discussion and their added wisdom and their added perspective and their shared responsibility, where collectively we make decisions. And then constitutionally, there's things that we have to get elder approval from. So that really doesn't change. That continues to operate as we presently do, where at the end of the day, as pastors, regardless of if we're clarifying the shared role or not, we're accountable and responsible to the elder council. Now, some of you may be saying, what if we disagree with each other? Which never happens.
Almost
never. There's good creative tension that happens, and those of you that work in the office, you see that, and there's a good complementary way that works. But again, at the end of the day, if we can't work through disagreement with each other, then you should probably find two different pastors anyway. But we're going to pray and seek wise counsel, and ultimately, at the end of the day, we refer to the elder council to resolve. That hasn't happened in 5 years. Not that we haven't disagreed, but to the point where we can't figure out how to resolve it and give and take and figure out what's best for the church as a whole. So we don't anticipate that happening, but if you see that happening, you can let us know. Again, we're held accountable by the elder council, who's ultimately responsible. Some of you may want to know, okay, what do we call you? Whatever.
Pastor Dan,
Pastor Ron, yeah. No one will necessarily be the lead pastor as far as title. So you can call him Pastor A and Pastor 1, or Pastor 1 and Pastor A, whatever you want to do. And then what are our individual responsibilities? There are still going to be things, you can say, well, it sounds nice. You guys have a co-leadership idea, but who's ultimately going to be responsible for some things that somebody needs to be responsible for around here? And this is where I like the team model, because frankly, I'm about maxed out in leading some things. Where I need to delegate and give over some things to some leaders that are coming up. Frankly, I'm holding too much. And you may say, well, if you're doing that, then why are we doing this? Because we want to model team leadership, and I need to give away some things to some of you. Aren't you excited? I need to give away some things to some of you. But at the end of the day, we still need to be responsible for and holding others accountable as they lead. So I'll let Pastor Ron share very briefly the things that ultimately will fall under his oversight, and then I'll share what falls under my oversight. And then, of course, we invite you to come back tonight, ask questions, help us think through some things, gain greater clarity on what we mean when we talk about leading and serving together in a team.
Actually, I'm going to flip it.
Okay.
And I'm going to explain what you're responsible for, and you can talk about what I'm responsible for.
Let me take some notes.
Yeah, you better do that.
Okay.
Dan is, of course, is going to be overseeing vision. He has a clear and compelling vision for the future. A lot of what is taking place now in our ministry, reformatting, children's ministry, youth, young people, etc., is focused out of Dan's vision. Continue to provide vision. He's already pastor of administration. I think the first day I came into the office, I said, you are now administrative pastor. Because he'd already been working with the staff. He already had been there for years, knew the function of the office, knew the function of the plant, all the rest of it. And I said, there's no sense me taking that away from you. You already know it. You're already doing it. Just keep on doing it. So he will continue to do that. Office staff, first impressions, facilities, BBC Kids Ministry, worship, family. And he's also on the West Shore Christian Academy board. So he'll be responsible for overseeing those, not doing all those, but overseeing those as he is now. The BBC Kids Ministry directors, pastor of student ministries, Pastor Scott, administrative assistant, facilities director, all report to Dan. That's nothing new, already do. And responsible for weekly staff meetings and preach various times throughout the year, which he's already doing. But that will continue.
And one of the things that we're trying to do is, and we want you to understand, we're clarifying what is already happening. Functionally, there's not going to be a huge change. It's more perceptually, and also that team model, making that clear that that's an expectation for us, not just for other ministries. Pastor Ron will continue to oversee our worship services, theming and planning sermon series, those kind of things. The pastoral care, which he does the majority of now, visitation, hospital visits, all of those things. Overseeing our ABFs. He's doing a lot with our small group ministry that we're getting started, which we'll talk more about next week. Men's and women's ministries, our deacons. He attends our deacon meetings regularly and gives counsel to our deacon chairman. The missions committee, he participates actively with. The finance committee, and then he chairs and runs all the business meetings. So all of our ABF teachers, our men's and women's ministry directors, missions committee chairman, deacon chairman, finance committee chairman, they all kind of go to him and get input and oversight from him. And then he's responsible for the elder council meetings, not that he doesn't delegate that at times, deacon meetings, and carries most of the preaching responsibilities on a regular basis. So again, not much changes functionally, But I understand that perceptually, this is probably a little different way of thinking about pastoral leadership from the top down, especially here at Bible Baptist Church. I don't know if you have any closing.
Just that it also allows us, as we move ahead year by year, to transition some of these things. Because it's a co-lead model, it doesn't mean that these two job descriptions as we see them now have to stay the same always. They can be shifted, moved, and adjust depending on the needs of the ministry and the giftedness of the participants. So again, it's a defined team, but it's also a flexible team model that enables us hopefully to continue to move the church forward in accomplishing its God's given vision, to gather, to grow, to give, and to go.
So as you leave this morning, and we're wrapping up here, I'm going to ask, we had some ushers with some packets. I gave them to you ahead of time. If you go to the doors, as you leave this morning, you're going to receive a 2-page packet. It's front and back. The first is what we call a pastoral leadership team fact sheet, frequently asked questions. It's basically what we just worked through with you over the last 15 minutes or so, but you can have it in writing in case you forgot or wanted to see that. Please continue to jot down additional questions that maybe we didn't ask that you want clarified and want to understand better. But the second page is this also involves a constitutional amendment to change our Constitution to allow for a shared leadership model. Presently, our Constitution requires a lead pastor. So there is a proposed constitutional amendment, front and back, that you can review as well. We'll talk more about that tonight if you have questions about that as well. But please pick that up. There's enough for one per family to start. Take that home with you. Jot down any questions you have. Please come back tonight at 6 o'clock for our question and answer. You can ask questions about this or anything that we've talked about up to this point in the Vision Casting series. And we welcome, need, and invite your feedback and perspective as together we seek what's next for Bible Baptist Church as God leads us collectively as a congregation. So let's stand together as we conclude this morning. We'll have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed.
Lord God, we thank you so much for loving us.